What is an eval? It's a structured set of repeatable tests that you would give to AI or an AI agent in this case, so that you can verify it does what you want it to do.
Ben, I heard someone say that if enterprises don't use evals to test their agents, their AI projects are going to fail. Is that true?
I would absolutely agree with that. When you're talking about AI or AI agents in particular, if you don't have a great set of evals, then very likely you'd have no idea what these agents are going to do, and you're probably going to end up with a failed project.
Oh my goodness. But we've seen enterprises and even, the model makers of the world, like the OpenAIs, et cetera, they release all these benchmarks and LLM scores. Is that the same thing?
So when we say the word eval, what we mean is it kind of comes from evaluations, right? And so a benchmark is a type of evaluation. And there's some really great benchmarks these days, even benchmarks that test advanced functionality, things like the SWE bench, things like the GDP val, which tests the idea of more kind of way that people work in organizations. There's things like the Apex test from Mercor, which tests some more business specific types of tests. And then there's Humanity's Last Exam, which tests super expert level knowledge of things. So these are all great benchmarks. But all of that is different from the idea of when somebody comes into your company to do a specific task that you need to make sure that they can do it with the types of processes that you have and the types of inputs that you give them. That's usually when you have an eval set where you're testing the exact things that you want these people to do, or in this case, these agents to do. And that's the business scenario, the use case that you want the agents to accomplish. And you need to actually try those kinds of things.
I see. Okay. So benchmarks are typically more generic, like general knowledge that typically people would know that you would want to test AI on if it's kind of producing the right answers. And then evals are more specific to business tasks or specific, job to be done that you'd want to evaluate your agent on, whether it's doing it or not.
So what is an eval? It's a structured set of repeatable tests that you would give to AI or an AI agent in this case, so that you can verify it does what you want it to do.
But Ben, if we're seeing how these AI models perform against these benchmarks and they're getting better and better as we're seeing these scores, why won't they be able to, when they come into an enterprise, complete those tasks? Why should there be a separate, test?
In general, when you're building agents to do something specific in your company, you're typically giving them specific inputs that are your inputs. In many cases, this is private data.
Like business context.
This is not something that maybe has ever appeared in any sort of actual real world training data or anything else. And every company is also a little bit different with what they do and how they do it and what the kind of inputs that they give. And so for that reason, even if you have a very capable agent that's passing generic benchmarks in the world, it doesn't mean that it's going to specifically be able to give you what you want without further instructions. Mm-hmm. And customizing instructions to agents is a big part of how you use agents. But this is also where the second piece comes in, which is the idea that getting the instructions right can be hard. You can give it too vague instructions. If you say, I want you to evaluate this contract to see if it's risky. But what does risky mean? Risky might mean different things, even to professional lawyers. Or if you said something like, I want to make sure that this is a sophisticated answer, or I want you to create a blog post that has this tone. But each of these different terms about how to describe what you want can be misinterpreted by different people. And so what you learn when you start to play with these agents and just AI models in general is that they will intelligently respond to you, but you need to understand how they interpret your instructions. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of evals, is making sure that they are able to do what you want them to do. And then the third piece is that and not everybody's kind of used to this, because when you deal with computers, you usually it's to say, oh, it works now, therefore it's always going to work. But they're non-deterministic. They will have slightly different outputs for the same input over time. And this is kind of inherent to the way that large language models work, to the way AI models work, is that there's a bit of randomness that's kind of built into the system. So you can try this if you want right now, with ChatGPT, Gemini, or really any sort of AI system, and ask it the same question twice. But something that had a little bit of a subjectiveness to it. Mm-hmm. What is the greatest sports team in history, or something like that? And you'll realize that if you ask it twice in a row, it'll give you different answers, because there's just a little bit of randomness built into it. And so that kind of thing is important for you to recognize. And this is why in an eval set, repeatable is key, is that you don't just try things once, you try things multiple times. And you try them when things change. And then that way you're able to sort of figure out if your AI agents will be giving you the right answer, even though they kind of have a little bit of randomness built into it.
Can you give me an example where an enterprise might want to come in and, for their specific use case and what they may want to evaluate?
Yeah, so really this depends on what you want an agent to be able to do in your organization. So for example, let's say that if you had an agent that was helping to evaluate some contracts for you. So you had a lot of different contracts, you're looking up key terms, you're trying to evaluate the different clauses of a contract. You can have agents do that, but you need to make sure that they're able to then work on not just a generic contract that you found online that you tested or generic benchmark, but you actually try it with your type of contracts in the format that they're in the types of clauses that you typically have in your contracts. Not usually just one, but multiple of these. Or something else, like let's say that you have agents that are helping you to, let's say you're in sales and you need to answer like a set of customer questions in like an RFP form, a whole bunch of complex questions. You need to make sure your agent can answer those kind of questions with your data and looking up sort of the corpus of data that you have so that they're able to go through and give you the types of answers that you'd expect for an important task like that.
So the three things that you just laid out that are characteristics of agents, why we should do evals, how do evals actually help with those?
Many ways. So if you're building agents, you're customizing them, then like evals are sort of one of the only ways that you can be sure that what you're building is going to work. Some people will say like evals are the new PRDs or product requirement documents, in that in many cases, like the old way of building software was that you would describe what you want and then an engineer would implement it. But now with evals, what you need to do is describe, with this input, I expect this kind of output. And then you try it, and then you make sure that the agent responds that way. And this is very critical because if you don't do that, then again, you're not quite sure whether what they're interpreting what you have, your instructions that you're giving these agents appropriately. And so like people who build agents will sometimes have hundreds or thousands of these different tests that they have. And it's very important to have constantly be running these to make sure that your agents will be able to respond properly. So as builders of software, builders of agents, including enterprises, you need to be able to always to have an eval set that you're able to run against.
So then does that mean that every enterprise is going to be building agents and having their own eval sets?
Well, certainly if you are an enterprise that is building agents, you should certainly have eval software and these like large set of cases. But no matter what, whenever you're using AI agents, even testing agents that other people have built, and you assume that they have hopefully put in that level of effort to make sure their agents work. But typically agents are customized. And so in almost all cases, you should use these principles of AI evals so that you're able to make sure that your AI agents will work for the things that you're asking it to do. Whether it's very complex, big things, whether it's something small, but then for all of the many different ways that you can use AI agents, the key is to make sure that you have a set of tests that you can run, and that you run them repeatedly, and that any time that you change anything, that you check those again.
So you mentioned principles of AI evals. What are these principles?
So I'd say when you get to the point, and then for whatever task you have, and this will be something that is like ongoing and you'll probably be developing over time and constantly iterating on. So the first one is make sure that you test it with the input that you expect it to work on. Just generic input, testing things like one example that you found, a generic example, usually is good to do, but not good enough for making sure it works with the examples that you want, the input that you want. The second is anything you really care about, you should actually have an example where you test it. So in your eval set, you should have test cases for things that you consider to be important for you. And the third is that you should test things that you expect to fail. And you should watch how they fail and make sure they fail appropriately. Yeah.
But Ben, I mean, even if I think of my own, product marketing use cases and tasks, there is a number of important tasks that I have to do in any given day. And each of those tasks also have variations in them. So if I started to list these out, I mean, I'd never be done with these evals. I'd have to keep doing them.
Yeah.
And how do we get to a point where an enterprise can say, okay, I have completed evals and now I can move from a proof of concept stage to org-wide deployment? When does that happen?
So I think that one sort of proxy in your mind would be to, let's say that you had a new person who came into your organization who was going to do work for you, and you wanted to make sure that that anything that they were going to do that's important to you, you gave them a test for. You checked it out. You did a little scenario to ensure they were able to do that. And so you could test them for every single thing in the world, but at some point and depending on the use case is different, but you start to get the gist that they can handle a different set of input. And that's really the key of evals. When you stop is when you start to realize that you can properly predict the answers after you've tried a few times.
Mm-hmm. But then that sounds really obvious that, okay, of course, I would test something that fails to make sure that it doesn't do something that it's not supposed to.
Yeah. I mean, this is actually one of my favorite things is that actually most people don't do this. Okay. And there's actually a bias here that people have, which I'll demonstrate. Have you ever played the 2-4-6 game?
I've not.
Okay. So I have an algorithm in my head that describes 3 numbers. You have to guess the algorithm, and you can ask me any 3 sets of numbers. I will say to start, 2-4-6 does actually obey this algorithm. So ask me some numbers.
Okay. How about 12, 14, 16?
Yes.
1/2, 3/4, and a whole one.
Yes.
Okay. 0, 0, 0.
No.
Oh, interesting. So is the algorithm just the series of number that ascendingly go up?
Yep. Monotonically increasing numbers. That's the algorithm. But you didn't know that. You didn't know this until you were able to find questions that gave you a no for the answer. And this is a confirmation bias that everybody has. Once you see something working, then you expect that you know exactly how it works. This is a problem with in general, but with AI agents. So this is why you come up with tests usually where you expect them to fail, but you expect them to fail in a certain way. And actually, you'll find often that they fail in a very different way than you expect, and then you learn a lot from that kind of thing. So that's why I mentioned that you should probably include those kind of examples. Even if they seem almost obvious, you probably will learn a lot from that kind of example in your eval set.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for that math pop quiz that I did not sign up for. But my main takeaway from all of this great discussion was that agent evals are actually an integral part of your AI strategy and a continuous part of your AI strategy. If you have tips on evals for agents, tell us in the comments below and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. We'll see you next time.